Have you ever had one of those nights that completely changes your perspective on everything? One invitation, a simple come over, and suddenly you're thrust into an emotional experience so deep, it alters the way you view intimacy forever. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, just a casual get-together. But what unfolded that night? It challenged everything I thought I knew about connection. Real intimacy isn't about what you can touch, it's about what you can feel. And what I felt that night, it wasn't what I expected, and it wasn't something I could have ever prepared for. I invite you to stay with me through this true story time, where the boundaries of connection, vulnerability, and emotional discovery were tested. Trust me when I say, this is not just about the night. It's about the transformation that followed. You won't want to miss the moment that changed everything. So grab a seat, hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to turn on the notifications. Let's dive into this real emotional experience together. It all began on a night like any other, except that it wasn't. You know those nights that start off mundane, but somehow end up being a turning point? I wasn't expecting it, and frankly, neither was he. Walking into that room felt like stepping into an alternate reality, where everything I thought I knew about connection and intimacy was about to be turned upside down. As I sat there, sipping my wine, I could feel the unspoken tension, the strange familiarity between us that wasn't there before. Something was different, something was real, and I couldn't place it at first. It was an unexpected connection, one that would reshape everything I believed about emotional vulnerability and intimacy. The couple sitting across from me, an odd, yet incredibly magnetic pair, seemed to carry a certain energy that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just attraction. It was deeper, almost like they were silently communicating with each other and with me, without a single word being exchanged. Have you ever experienced a moment where the air feels thick with understanding, as if you're all speaking the same unspoken language? That was the start of what I now see as an emotional transformation, one that made me realize that intimacy isn't always about what we say, it's about what we feel. Every gesture, every glance, every pause carried so much weight. I didn't understand it immediately, but I felt it. It was an emotional story time unfolding right before my eyes, one that would forever change the way I looked at relationships. This wasn't just about being in a room with two people, it was about being in the presence of something so much deeper. The more we talked, the more I realized how little we actually needed to say to feel understood. And that, in itself, was an awakening. The dynamic in the room wasn't based on words, but on shared energy, shared experiences. It was a dance of emotions, a story of intimacy unfolding before me, one that I would carry with me forever. What I didn't realize at that moment was that this night, this seemingly small encounter, would become the foundation for a deep, unspoken bond that would last long after we said our goodbyes. There was a sense of peace, of raw honesty, in knowing that real emotional connection doesn't have to be loud. In fact, the most powerful connections are often the quietest. It was a silent agreement we all made, without even saying a word. And this was just the beginning. It started like a scene from a movie. A simple invitation, a bottle of wine, and a promise of something casual. But we all know that nothing is truly casual when emotions are involved. Walking into that house, I felt an unfamiliar warmth, not just from the flickering lights or the soft music playing in the background, but from the unspoken understanding that hung in the air. I hadn't expected this, but I felt drawn to it. There was a strange pull, an undeniable connection that made me think, maybe this is the night that will change everything. The evening unfolded gently, like the soft brush of a hand on your arm that leaves more than just a physical trace. It leaves a feeling. The conversation flowed effortlessly, but it wasn't just about the words we spoke. It was about what was left unsaid. The way he looked at me, the subtle shifts in the atmosphere between us, made everything feel charged. There was no pressure, no expectations. Instead, there was a quiet intimacy that made my heart race and my thoughts scatter. And that was when I realized this wasn't just a typical night. This was about real emotional experience, the kind that digs deep and challenges everything you thought you knew about connection. As the night progressed, it wasn't about the wine or the food or even the laughter that filled the room. It was about presence. Their presence, his presence, and the way everything seemed to slow down, focusing entirely on the now. It wasn't something I had ever planned for, but it felt so right. Every movement seemed intentional. Every word was carefully placed. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A deep, emotional intimacy. Not just with them, but with myself. I felt my walls fall, layer by layer, as the connection between us deepened. By the time the evening ended, I wasn't just reflecting on what had happened. I was reflecting on how much I had changed in just a few short hours. It wasn't the kind of change you can see, it's the kind that happens inside, in places words can't touch. And as I stepped out of that house, I knew that something had shifted inside me. It wasn't just about the night. It was about a new way of seeing intimacy, a new way of embracing connection. But little did I know, the journey wasn't over yet. It wasn't about the physicality of the evening, not really. It was about something far more profound. As they welcomed me into their space, it wasn't with pressure, nor was it with an agenda. It was with presence. There's a difference, you know? When people allow you to simply be with them, without any expectation, any rush, it creates an entirely different dynamic. The more I was there, the more I began to realize that this wasn't about performance. It was about emotional empowerment. The kind of connection that doesn't need to be rushed, doesn't need to be flaunted, it just is. Every glance held meaning. Every pause felt heavy with emotion. It wasn't a sensual narrative in the traditional sense. It was far more vulnerable, more honest. I could feel the unspoken words in the room, words that weren't necessary because we were all communicating through something far more intimate. Our presence. In that space, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like I was part of something far more significant, far more personal. It was as if our energies had aligned in a way I couldn't have anticipated, yet was exactly what I needed. What struck me the most wasn't the physical closeness that eventually came. It was the emotional intensity that built up between us. I had always thought intimacy was a physical act, but this was different. It was a deeper connection, one that didn't rely on touch, but on understanding, on shared energy. The kind of intimacy that doesn't fade with distance, the kind that stays with you long after the night ends. It was real intimacy, true intimacy. The kind that changes the way you see yourself, the way you see others, and the way you experience relationships. In that moment, I began to realize that intimacy is more than just being close to someone. It's about knowing and being known, about vulnerability without shame, and connection without fear. It was a transformative experience. But as I sat there, wrapped in the warmth of that emotional closeness, I could feel that something else was coming, something that would push the boundaries of everything I knew about connection. As the night unfolded, I felt the boundaries between us begin to blur, like soft edges fading into one another. At first, I had thought there would be limits to what I would share, limits to what I would feel, limits to what was even possible in that moment. But As time went on, I realized that boundaries weren't something to fear. In fact, they weren't even there anymore. Instead, there was an openness, a shared energy that moved between us like an invisible current. Each movement, every glance, felt intentional, like it was all leading to something deeper than I had ever experienced before. It was as though the very act of surrendering to the moment allowed clarity to emerge. In the absence of expectations, we were free to just be, to connect on a level that went beyond the physical, beyond the words, and into the heart of what it means to be truly vulnerable. I could feel the mutual curiosity between us, the way each of us was choosing to stay open, to stay present, despite the unfamiliarity of it all. It wasn't about fulfilling desires or seeking pleasure. It was about discovering a deeper understanding of ourselves and each other. The night became less about the physical closeness and more about the emotional resonance we shared. We didn't need to speak to communicate. The silence between us was filled with understanding. There was something incredibly powerful about being in a space where the usual boundaries, emotional, physical, and even mental, didn't exist. It was as if we had found a way to connect in a realm where only feelings mattered, where energy, not words, determined our relationship. It was sensual not because of what we did, but because of how we were, how we felt. Looking back, I can see that what happened wasn't just about breaking boundaries. It was about understanding that boundaries were never meant to confine us in the first place. They were meant to be crossed, to be challenged, to be pushed until we find the freedom to be completely ourselves. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something even more powerful was about to unfold, something that would make me question everything I knew about intimacy, connection, and what it means to truly be present with another person. As the night came to an end, I found myself sitting in the quiet aftermath, my thoughts swirling with emotions I hadn't expected. What started as an impromptu encounter, something so seemingly casual, had turned into an experience that felt like a lifetime compressed into a few hours. It wasn't just about what we had shared physically or emotionally. It was about how the entire experience had shifted something within me. It was a rare alignment, a connection that couldn't be replicated. It was something I would carry with me, not as a memory of an event, but as a reminder of how open and vulnerable I could truly be. I didn't feel regret or confusion, only clarity. As I sat there, reflecting on the night, I realized that the most profound moments aren't always the ones that make the loudest noise. Sometimes, the quietest, most intimate experiences hold the greatest meaning. What we shared wasn't just a fleeting moment of connection. It was a real emotional experience, one that taught me more about myself than I could have imagined. It was about growth, about shedding the layers that kept me from truly embracing who I am, who I could be in the presence of others. The emotional transformation I went through that night was subtle, but undeniable. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was enough to make me see the world of intimacy, vulnerability, and connection through a new lens. The self-discovery that came from that night wasn't just about what I'd learned about them. It was about what I'd learned about myself. I had allowed myself to be vulnerable in a way I hadn't in a long time, and in doing so, I discovered that there was so much more to intimacy than I had ever realized. As I left that experience behind, I carried with me a deeper understanding of what it means to truly connect with another person. It wasn't about what we shared physically. It was about the emotional resonance that lingered long after the night had ended. That night didn't just change the way I see intimacy. It changed the way I see myself and the way I interact with the world. And in the quiet moments after, I couldn't help but wonder, what would the next chapter hold? Now, here's where it gets real. The kind of connection we're talking about isn't something you find every day. It's about being open, vulnerable, and embracing the true emotional experience when the opportunity presents itself. It's not easy, but let me ask you, what's stopping you from seeking real intimacy in your life? How often do you settle for surface-level connections when something deeper is just waiting to be explored? Maybe, just maybe, it's time for you to take that leap, step into the unknown, and allow yourself the chance to truly connect without words, without boundaries. What's the next step for you? Are you ready to redefine intimacy in your own life? Or are you content staying in the same place? Don't let this story be just another thing you scroll past. Let it be the catalyst for your own emotional growth. If you're ready to go deeper, to find real intimacy, then I want you to subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications, and leave a comment below about your own thoughts. This journey is just getting started, and I'll be here to guide you every step of the way. So, what will your next story be?